Thank you to Brava Dance Center for sponsoring this interview with Ryemarkable mom, Rachel Galvez. Hi guys, I'm Liz Woods and I'm here today with Rachel Galvez. Rachel is the mom of 2 kids and a dog, and she was born in Vietnam. Around the end of the Vietnam War, when she was 1, she was adopted by an American family, and she's recently reconnected with her birth family, and she's here today to share her story. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Thanks for having me, Liz. It's a pleasure.
So can you start off, I guess, by sharing a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I was adopted from Vietnam at the end of the war. I was adopted by a very loving American family. I grew up in New Canaan, Connecticut, and lived a life probably similar to many of you. I went to high school and college, and then lived in the city. Went to business school, got married, had children. I've lived in Rye now for 7 years with my husband and my dog and my 2 kids. In 2017, I had always known I was from Vietnam, and I had never really explored it or questioned it. And about 3-4 years ago in 2017, I decided to take a DNA test out of curiosity. And the test came back and it said, I don't know if you've ever taken one of these tests, but it gives you sort of your ethnic background. And mine said 50% Southeast Asian and 50% European, which they always assumed I was, that my birth mother was a Vietnamese woman and my biological father was probably an American soldier. So this test sort of confirmed that that's probably what had happened. After that, I didn't do much with it. I did discover some social media pages, some Facebook pages with other Vietnamese adoptees. So there was thousands of children that were orphaned in the Vietnam War that were adopted to American families, and also Canada, Europe, Australia. So I sort of reconnected with them a bit. And then, life just kind of gets in the way, and I was working and raising my kids, and so I kind of put that aside. And then in the summer of 2018, I'm in the car with my husband, the kids are in the back, and I get a message on Facebook Messenger, and it says, "Hi, I've just taken a DNA test, and it says you're my aunt, and I don't know how to put this together." And I kind of got the chills, knowing that I was adopted, so this has to be probably some tie to a biological relative. And I said, "Well, tell me more about yourself." And she said, "Well, my mother and I immigrated from Vietnam in the 90s. And I said, "Well, I was adopted from Vietnam." And she said, "Oh, that's interesting. My mother said she had a baby sister, and they never knew what happened to her." And so this is kind of going back and forth. And she said, I said, "Oh, do you know that baby's name?" And so I think they had to go home that night, and they looked at some of the documents, and they said the baby's name was Nguyen Thai Kim Hung. And that evening I go home and I look at all my documents, my adoption papers and my Vietnamese passport, and it says Nguyen Thai Kim Hung.
No way.
So I'm just amazed.
Yes.
My husband was amazed. My husband thought, "Well, do they want money? What's going on?" I said, "Well, no, this is a DNA test. We are genetically related." And so before we even really said anything, or before we told my birth mother, who is still alive in Vietnam, we had my biological sister take a test to prove that we are biological siblings. So those came back in a month and confirmed it. I met my biological sister. She came up. So my biological sister immigrated from Vietnam in the 90s to New Jersey. So lives only a couple hours away. As I said, growing up before DNA testing or anything like that, because I had come out of a third world country during a war, I never imagined ever finding, birth relatives, and it never was really that important to me because I did grow up with a very loving family, big family of 5 kids, and so with lots of opportunities. This is all kind of amazing. And comes up, lots of different issues come up, and how do you talk to your adopted family about this, and how do you talk to friends about this, or your children?
Right.
So I kept it fairly private, and I had just meeting like with my husband actually, and some close friends, and we had my biological sister come up to Rye. We had dinner, and it was very nice. There was a nice connection. She showed me pictures of my birth mother, who she grew up with.
Wow.
So she grew up at the Yeah, and it's actually kind of, it makes me feel very fortunate, but she grew up, you know, in sort of this war-torn country as seen as the enemy because she's half white. So they were in re-education camps. She was never able to go to school. They were homeless, living in poverty. And then she was actually able to immigrate in the 90s through a program that Americans sponsored.
So at some point you met your birth mother.
I did, yes.
How did that all work out?
So my birth mother is still alive in Nha Trang, Vietnam. I have found out since that I was born in Da Nang, which was a big U.S. military base in Vietnam. I met my birth sister the fall of 2017, and she was going back to visit our mother in Vietnam that February 2018. And the time that she was going back actually coincided with the kids' winter break. So we decided as a family to go back, visit Vietnam. For me, it was the first time going back to Vietnam since I had left as a 1-year-old.
Wow.
So in February of 2018, I had arrived from Saigon as a baby, January 1974, so Saigon to JFK. And I thought it was kind of, so February of 2018, I think 44 years later, I fly JFK to Saigon with my husband and kids, who were at the time, I guess, 8 and 6.
Had to be surreal.
It was completely surreal. It's also a, 16-hour flight, and with the, layover in China. We had, lots of backup power and iPad. We flew to Saigon, and then from there we flew to Da Nang, where I was born. We found out that I was born in Da Nang through my birth mother, and visited, some of the tourist spots there. And then we took a train to Nha Trang, where my birth mother lives. So she had not seen me since I was 5 months old. And of course probably would have completely fallen apart if my kids weren't there. So I was teary-eyed. And it is, as I wrote an article, it's just something you can't really put into words. And there's so many mixed emotions. And it's kind of, the irony is I look more like her than my sister who grew up with her. And
does she speak English?
She doesn't speak English, so part of the reason we went when my sister went was because, as a translator, so you really needed, she doesn't speak any English.
And you went to her home?
We went to her home. We stayed in a hotel, but she lives in this sort of rural farming village. Very poor, but very kind of content and happy. I mean, the children loved their, cows and puppies and dogs, and there was her bathroom to flush the toilet. You actually have to take a bucket of water, and so they kind of thought that was interesting, stuff that boys like. So, and she lives with she had a son out. She lives with my, I guess, half brother and his family, in this little kind of house in a rural village in the Trang. She had, this is kind of hard for me, but she had said that that she saw me, I was 5 months old, and she thought of me every day since, which for me as a mother was very heartbreaking, because I thought, my gosh, how can you live your life this way? And I think that's something as a you don't understand until you're really a mom. So what I did learn was that it was my biological grandmother that gave me away, because she saw that the war was ending, and I guess she kind of knew what was going to happen to these, I'm half American, half white, and they have a lot of sort of derogatory names for these babies. They called them monkey-eyed babies, and they really experienced a lot of racism after the war, as my sister did. So my grandmother, I guess my birth mother went to work, and I was the fourth. She has had a son since then. And she came back and she said, "Where's the baby?" And my grandmother said, "Well, I gave the baby to an American organization." So my grandmother gave me away to this woman that we've since learned her name, Michelle Wenzel, who took me to an orphanage called Sacred Heart in Da Nang. And from there, Sacred Heart, I went to an orphanage called Toam in Saigon, where there's lots of Catholic nuns working to get these babies out. And there was I actually was adopted in '74, but as as it got closer to April 75, when South Vietnam actually fell, there was a huge effort. It was called Operation Baby Lift on the part of Americans to help these babies find homes. So, my grandmother did this out of the goodness of her heart, I believe, and gave me an amazing life. But that left, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I've done this story. This is the first time I've cried. It's so funny. I've done this story. Anyway, so should we pause there for a second?
Sure.
Is that too much? Or?
Rachel, you met your biological mom. Have you connected with your dad at all?
I haven't. Interestingly, I have been in touch with other adoptees, and a lot of times they find the relative on the father's side because the fathers were typically American soldiers. So even if they find a first cousin or something like that, they can tie that. But I haven't, and this was just sort of a relationship. He never even knew about me. So this was, just a kind of a boyfriend-girlfriend situation, and then he was restationed by the time she knew that she was pregnant.
That makes sense.
Which was common.
Yeah.
And so I haven't learned anything about my biological father's side.
Maybe you will after this
Maybe
video.
I will. Maybe I will.
So you met your mom a few years ago at this point.
I first met her in February 2018.
And then where have you been since then?
When I got back from Vietnam, first of all, it's just a beautiful country. The people were very warm and friendly. I've learned a lot about the orphanages where the babies are really well taken care of and loved, and we got the vaccinations and medical care, which as moms we know when we have our own kids, you think about all this stuff and all the and I was I kind of thought, well, I was in an orphanage, how did I survive? But they took really good care of us. And I actually visited the orphanage that I was in while I was there. So since then, I actually went back by myself to see her again in the summer of February 2019. My sister was there and my nieces to translate. I was planning to go back in 2020, but because of COVID, they've shut the borders, but just to keep that up. I've reconnected with a lot of Vietnamese adoptees and met some. There's a lot of them outside of New York and sort of heard their stories. But having that experience, I know a lot of adoptees are searching for biological relatives. Some of them were older, as old as 10 when they were adopted, so they actually have memories of their birth families and the experience when they were separated. So I felt like this kind of good fortune was dropped in my lap, and I've always wanted to do something positive with my story and something that could help the Vietnamese adoptee community or just adoptee community or even veterans. So I reconnected. I was asked to be part of a documentary about some Vietnamese adoptees that was being funded out of a university in Southern California, and there was a documentary producer. And the idea was that, he was going to show kind of how we've reconnected and we were all going to go back to Vietnam. And then COVID happened. So the timing got pushed off and the funding got a little bit delayed. So that project has really morphed into something new, which is we've established a foundation. Another adoptee and I co-founded it. And then we have two other adoptees. We all met in January in New York, last January in New York. And the four of us, Kirk, Mike, Con, and myself, were all born in Da Nang, and we were all in Sacred Heart Orphanage.
Wow.
We have found, Kirk and Con have been back to Sacred Heart, and Kirk actually had pictures of the registry, and we've found all of our Vietnamese names in the registry, which have the name, the date you arrived, the date you left, and your birth date. And the dates are not completely accurate. And Kirk, Con, and I have all found biological relatives. Kirk has found his birth mother and father the same year that I found my birth mother through DNA, and again, not expecting anything. And Con recently found his birth mother. And similar story, he had a half-sister immigrate to Chicago that they found each other. Actually, like my story, his niece had taken the DNA test. So he's met his half-sister, his birth mother he has yet to meet, but she's in Vietnam. And all of us, I think, are really driven to give back to the community. And, we've all really appreciate the lives we've been given. I think we're all living sort of successful lives professionally and family-wise. And so we've established this foundation really to, one, help adoptees reconnect with birth families. So, we're getting some of the DNA companies are donating test kits, and we hope maybe to go back to Vietnam and help distribute it or educate those, because a lot of, it's having access to test kits, and the testing is expensive for people in Vietnam.
Right.
We also, part of our mission is really to help veterans heal, Vietnam veterans specifically, but maybe veterans from all wars. So one of the interesting things we've learned, some of Kirk and I guess Mike are tied to, I think all of their dads were in the military, but we've learned that a lot of the military personnel in Vietnam, and I'm sure in other wars as well, spent a lot of time volunteering at these orphanages and really bonding with the kids. They helped with vaccinations, they played with us. Some of them were hoping to adopt these kids. And when the war ended rather abruptly and they had to come back home, we've Zoomed with them. Kirk has met with one. They kind of have lived their life like what happened to these children.
Of course, yeah.
So our kind of reconnecting with them has been really healing for them to say, wow, you guys have families, you're living lives. This is like very healing for them.
Yes.
And it's also a part of their life that they maybe hadn't talked about with their own family, as I'm sure a lot of veterans have, those sort of experiences that they see. And so that's another part of our foundation. We're hoping to put together a weekend we're calling it saltwater therapy, where we have some people willing to donate their fishing boats and other paddleboarding in their houses and bring together veterans and adoptees. We're hoping to do that over the fall, but I think we'll probably do that in the spring. So that's one thing. But yeah, so this is all relatively new. We just got our 501c3 status approval last spring.
Fabulous.
Yes, and we've got the board together, and so we've got everything in place now.
Wow. Yeah. Well, hopefully, again, that this interview will
this will be great.
Spread the
Thank
word,
you.
and some families and I can even help you.
Right.
So, Rachel, one thing that's been so inspiring for me about your story is how you've been so open to meeting your biological family and really developing those relationships with your mother and your sisters and niece. What have you learned in this process? What are you learning through this journey of, discovering a whole new family?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. It's interesting because, as I mentioned, this wasn't something I was searching for. I feel like it fell on my lap, and then I'm lucky and I'm fortunate, so I should do something with that. One of the things it's taught me is that anything is possible, and miracles do happen. This, to me, is a miracle that I was adopted out of an orphanage at the end of a war in a third world country and found my birth mother. I think there's been a lot of healing for me and made me feel very hopeful, even for others, that maybe they can find their birth families or they can find some sort of connection. If they can't find biological relatives, and as I mentioned, our program for veterans, there's hope and healing for them, or a lot of healing, just reconnecting with adoptees. And not all birth parents, by the way, are always open to reconnecting with the child that they gave up for adoption. So I feel very lucky that my birth family was, and I feel very lucky that my adoptive family has been very understanding.
Yes.
So hope, healing, miracles, all of those sort of things I've learned, and I've lived it.
Yeah, you're a shining example of it. So thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.